Deep in the remote mountains of southern Siberia, where winter temperatures plunge to -40 degrees, and the nearest city lies hundreds of kilometers away, a small piece of bone no bigger than a pebble was about to rewrite the entire story of human evolution. The Denisova Cave, carved into limestone cliffs overlooking the Inui River, had been home to our ancient relatives for hundreds of thousands of years. But no one could have predicted that this unremarkable cavern would yield one of the most shocking discoveries in the history of science. The bone fragment that changed everything was discovered in 2008 by Russian archaeologists who had been meticulously excavating the cave for decades. It was tiny, barely the size of a grapeseed, the tip of a pinky finger from what appeared to be a child who had died sometime between 30 and 50,000 years ago. To the untrained eye, it looked like nothing more than another piece of ancient debris scattered across the cave floor, among thousands of other bone fragments, stone tools, and ash deposits that had accumulated over millennia of human occupation. But this was no ordinary archaeological find. When the bone made its way to the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany, it landed on the desk of Svante Pääbo, a Swedish geneticist who had spent decades pioneering the impossible science of extracting DNA from ancient bones. What Pääbo and his team discovered when they analyzed the genetic material preserved within that tiny finger bone would shock the scientific world and force humanity to completely reconsider its own evolutionary history. The DNA told a story that no one was prepared to hear. This was not a Neanderthal, despite being found in a region where Neanderthal bones had been discovered for years. This was not a modern human, despite dating to a period when our own species was spreading across the globe. The genetic sequence that emerged from the laboratory computers revealed something that should have been impossible. This bone belonged to an entirely unknown species of human being, a sister lineage to Neanderthals that had been living in Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, without leaving any trace in the fossil record. The implications were staggering. For over a century, scientists had operated under the assumption that human evolution was a relatively simple story involving our own species, Homo sapiens, and our closest known relatives, the Neanderthals of Europe. The discovery of this new human species, which researchers named the Denisovans after the cave where they were found, meant that the human family tree was far more complex and interconnected than anyone had imagined. We were not alone in the world during our species' early expansion out of Africa. We shared the planet with at least two other types of human beings, and we had been completely unaware of one of them until a child finger bone revealed their existence. The technology that made this discovery possible represents one of the greatest achievements in the history of science. Ancient DNA research was considered impossible just a few decades ago because genetic material was thought to degrade too quickly to survive for more than a few thousand years. Pääbo and his colleagues had to develop entirely new techniques for extracting and analyzing microscopic fragments of genetic material from bones that had been buried in cave sediments for tens of thousands of years. They had to overcome contamination from modern DNA, degradation from environmental factors, and the challenge of working with genetic material that existed in quantities measured in picograms. The breakthrough came from recognizing that the cold, stable environment of the Denisova Cave had created perfect conditions for DNA preservation. The limestone cavern had maintained relatively constant temperatures and humidity levels for thousands of years, creating a natural refrigerator that had kept genetic material intact long after the organisms that carried it had died. Combined with new laboratory techniques that could amplify and sequence even heavily degraded DNA samples, these conditions made it possible to recover genetic information that should have been lost forever. What the DNA revealed about the Denisovans was extraordinary. These were not primitive early humans struggling to survive in harsh environments, but sophisticated people with large brains and complex cultural capabilities. Their genetic blueprint showed that they had evolved distinctive adaptations that allowed them to thrive in some of the most challenging environments on Earth. They possessed genetic variants that enhanced their ability to survive at high altitudes where oxygen levels are reduced, mutations that improved their capacity to function in extreme cold, and immune system genes that provided protection against diseases that would have been fatal to other human populations. The geographic scope of Denisovan presence began to emerge as researchers analyzed genetic material from additional cave sites and compared ancient DNA sequences with those of modern human populations around the world. These mysterious people had not been confined to a single cave in Siberia, but had spread across vast regions of Asia, from the frozen tundra of northern Russia to the tropical islands of Southeast Asia. They had been pioneers who pushed into territories that other human species could not survive, adapting to environments ranging from the highest mountain plateaus to coastal regions where they may have developed seafaring capabilities. Most shocking of all was the discovery that Denisovans had not simply disappeared without a trace. Their genetic legacy lives on in the DNA of modern human populations across Asia and the Pacific, with some groups carrying as much as 5% Denisovan genetic material in their genomes. This meant that our own species had not only encountered these mysterious people during our expansion across Asia, but had interbred with them extensively enough to incorporate their genetic adaptations into our own evolutionary lineage. The revelation that we carry Denisovan DNA in our bodies transformed the Denisovans from an abstract scientific curiosity into intimate relatives whose genetic gifts continue to benefit their descendants today. The ability of Tibetan people to live comfortably at altitudes that would incapacitate most other humans comes partly from Denisovan genes. The exceptional diving abilities of some Southeast Asian populations may reflect genetic contributions from these ancient people. Even our immune systems carry molecular tools inherited from Denisovan ancestors that help us fight diseases they encountered tens of thousands of years ago. Yet despite their obvious importance in human evolutionary history, the Denisovans remained almost completely invisible in the archaeological record. Unlike Neanderthals, who left behind numerous skulls, skeletons, and cultural artifacts, the Denisovans were known primarily from tiny bone fragments and teeth that could fit in the palm of a hand. Their presence in the world had to be inferred from genetic analysis rather than observed directly through fossil evidence, making them simultaneously one of the most important and most mysterious human species ever discovered. The mystery deepened as researchers realized that the genetic diversity within Denisovan populations suggested they had been separated into distinct groups that had evolved independently for hundreds of thousands of years. Some Denisovan lineages appeared to be as genetically distinct from each other as modern humans are from Neanderthals, implying that what scientists had labeled as a single species might actually represent multiple related but separate human lineages that had adapted to different environments across Asia. The story of the Denisovans is ultimately the story of how much we still do not know about our own evolutionary history and how dramatically new discoveries can change our understanding of what it means to be human. These people built tools, controlled fire, created art, and developed complex social structures sophisticated enough to allow them to colonize some of the most challenging environments on Earth. They lived alongside our own ancestors for tens of thousands of years, sharing knowledge and genetic material that continues to influence human biology today. As we stand at the beginning of a new era in human evolutionary research, powered by technologies that can extract information from increasingly ancient and degraded genetic material, the Denisovans represent both an answer and a question. They have shown us that human evolution was far more complex and interconnected than we previously imagined, while also revealing how much of our own story remains hidden in caves, sediments, and genetic sequences waiting to be discovered. The tiny finger bone that started this scientific revolution was just the first chapter in a story that continues to unfold as researchers around the world work to understand the full scope and significance of the Denisovan legacy that lives within us all. The human face that emerged from computer algorithms trained on ancient DNA sequences was unlike anything that had walked the earth for 40,000 years. Using sophisticated techniques that combine genetic analysis with evolutionary modeling, scientists began to piece together what a Denisovan might have looked like when they were alive, breathing, and building complex societies across prehistoric Asia. The reconstruction that appeared on laboratory screens showed a being that was unmistakably human, yet distinctly different from any modern population, with features that spoke of adaptations to environments and challenges that no longer exist in our contemporary world. The skull that housed the Denisovan brain was larger and more robust than that of modern humans, suggesting intellectual capabilities that may have exceeded our own in certain areas. The cranial capacity estimates derived from genetic analysis indicated brain volumes that approached or even surpassed those of Neanderthals, our other close evolutionary relatives, who are known to have possessed sophisticated cognitive abilities. But unlike the elongated skull shape characteristic of Neanderthals, Denisovan cranial architecture appeared to combine the best features of both Neanderthal and modern human brain organization, creating a neural platform capable of remarkable cognitive flexibility and environmental adaptation. The facial features reconstructed from genetic blueprints revealed a people who would have been immediately recognizable as human, but whose appearance reflected the unique evolutionary pressures they had faced during hundreds of thousands of years of adaptation to Asian environments. Their faces were broader than those of modern humans, with pronounced cheekbones and robust jaw structures that could accommodate the large molars found in Denisovan fossil remains. These dental features suggest a diet that required significant chewing power, possibly including tough plant materials, raw meat, and other foods that demanded strong jaw muscles and durable tooth enamel. The body structure that genetic analysis revealed was that of a people built for survival in some of the world's most challenging environments. Denisovans appear to have been taller and more muscular than most modern human populations, with skeletal systems designed to support greater body mass and more robust musculature. Their limb proportions suggest adaptations for both endurance and strength, characteristics that would have been essential for survival in the harsh climates and demanding landscapes where their remains have been discovered. Perhaps most remarkable were the physiological adaptations that genetic analysis revealed within Denisovan biology. These were not simply physical differences in appearance or body structure, but fundamental modifications to human physiology that had allowed them to colonize environments where other human species could not survive. The genetic variants responsible for these adaptations represent some of the most dramatic examples of human evolution in response to environmental pressure that scientists have ever documented. The ability to function at extreme altitudes was perhaps the most striking of these adaptations. Genetic analysis revealed that Denisovans possessed variants of the EPAS1 gene that dramatically enhanced their ability to extract oxygen from thin air at high elevations. This genetic modification was so effective that it allowed them to live permanently at altitudes above 4,000 meters, elevations where modern humans, without this adaptation, experience severe altitude sickness and can suffer life-threatening complications from oxygen deprivation. This high-altitude adaptation was not a minor evolutionary tweak, but a fundamental restructuring of human respiratory and circulatory physiology. The Denisovan version of the EPAS1 gene regulated the production of red blood cells in ways that maximized oxygen-carrying capacity without creating the blood thickness that would have strained their cardiovascular systems. They could maintain normal activity levels in environments where unacclimatized modern humans would be gasping for breath and struggling to perform even simple tasks. Equally remarkable were the adaptations that allowed Denisovans to function in extreme cold environments. Genetic variants related to metabolism and circulation provided enhanced ability to maintain core body temperature in conditions that would have quickly proved fatal to other human populations. These modifications included changes to blood vessel architecture that prevented frostbite in extremities, metabolic adjustments that allowed for efficient calorie burning in cold conditions, and possibly even modifications to skin and hair characteristics that provided better insulation against freezing temperatures. The immune system adaptations revealed through genetic analysis suggested that Denisovans had encountered and successfully adapted to disease challenges that were unknown to other human populations. Their genetic blueprints contained immune system variants that provided protection against pathogens specific to Asian environments, including diseases transmitted by animals and insects that other human species had never encountered. These adaptations had been refined over hundreds of thousands of years of exposure to distinctly Asian disease environments, creating immune capabilities that were both highly specialized and remarkably effective. Perhaps most intriguingly, some genetic variants found in Denisovan samples suggest adaptations related to enhanced cognitive abilities in specific areas. While it is impossible to directly assess intelligence from genetic material, certain genetic patterns associated with brain development and neural function in Denisovans differ significantly from those found in other human species. These differences may have contributed to enhanced spatial reasoning, pattern recognition, or memory capabilities that would have provided survival advantages in complex and challenging environments. The technological capabilities that emerged from archaeological analysis of Denisovan sites revealed a people whose material culture was as sophisticated as their biological adaptations. The tools found in association with Denisovan remains represent some of the most advanced stoneworking techniques known from their time period, with evidence of specialized manufacturing processes that required both technical skill and complex planning. These were not crude implements hastily fashioned for immediate use, but carefully crafted tools designed for specific purposes and built to last through extended use. The stone tool technologies associated with Denisovan sites show evidence of advanced knapping techniques that produced razor-sharp cutting edges and precisely shaped working surfaces. The production of these tools required detailed knowledge of stone properties, sophisticated understanding of fracture mechanics, and motor skills that could only have been developed through extensive training and practice. Some tool types found in Denisovan contexts were so specialized that their exact function remains unclear to modern archaeologists, suggesting technological innovations that address challenges no longer faced by contemporary human populations. Even more remarkable were the non-stone artifacts that have been recovered from Denisovan archaeological contexts. A bracelet made from polished chloridolite, a green mineral that required sophisticated drilling and polishing techniques to work, represents one of the earliest known examples of decorative jewelry in human history. The manufacturing techniques required to create this artifact would have demanded not only advanced technical skills, but also the cultural sophistication to value aesthetic beauty and personal adornment beyond mere functional utility. The evidence for controlled use of fire at Denisovan sites reveals mastery of one of humanity's most important technologies at levels that suggest these people had moved far beyond simple fire maintenance to sophisticated applications of thermal energy. Hearth structures found in Denisova caves show evidence of temperature control sophisticated enough to support advanced cooking techniques, tool manufacturing processes that required specific heat applications, and possibly even early metallurgy or ceramic production. The organization of living spaces within Denisova cave sites suggests social structures that were complex and well organized. Different areas of cave systems appear to have been designated for specific activities, with distinct zones for tool manufacturing, food preparation, sleeping, and waste disposal. This spatial organization required social cooperation and planning that could only have emerged from sophisticated cultural systems capable of coordinating group behavior and maintaining community standards over extended periods. The artistic capabilities evident in Denisovan archaeological contexts reveal aesthetic sensibilities and symbolic thinking that match or exceed those found in contemporary Neanderthal and early modern human sites. Beyond the famous chloridolite bracelet, Denisovan sites have yielded carved bone ornaments, modified shells that may have served as containers or decorative objects, and stone artifacts with incised patterns that appear to represent intentional artistic expression rather than functional markings. The evidence for long-distance trade or cultural exchange found at Denisovan sites suggests these people maintained contact networks that extended far beyond their immediate territories. Materials found in Denisovan caves that originated from sources hundreds of kilometers away indicate either extensive travel capabilities or participation in exchange networks that connected distant communities. These connections would have facilitated the spread of technological innovations, cultural practices, and genetic material across vast regions of prehistoric Asia. The hunting strategies employed by Denisovan communities reveal sophisticated understanding of animal behavior and coordinated group tactics that maximize success rates while minimizing risk to individual hunters. Evidence from bone accumulations in Denisovan sites suggests they were capable of taking large and dangerous prey, including cave bears, woolly rhinoceros, and other megafauna that would have required careful planning and coordinated group effort to hunt successfully. The dietary breadth evident in Denisovan archaeological remains suggests these people had developed comprehensive strategies for exploiting diverse food resources across multiple seasons and environmental conditions. Plant remains, animal bones, and other food debris indicate diets that included everything from large game mammals to small animals, fish, birds, nuts, berries, and other plant foods. This dietary flexibility would have provided crucial insurance against seasonal variations and resource fluctuations that could threaten survival in marginal environments. The seasonal organization of Denisovan activities, as revealed through analysis of archaeological deposits, demonstrates sophisticated planning capabilities and deep understanding of environmental cycles. Evidence suggests these communities organize their annual activities around predictable patterns of resource availability, migration timing, and weather conditions, indicating cultural knowledge systems capable of preserving and transmitting complex environmental information across generations. The construction techniques evident in Denisovan cave modifications reveal engineering capabilities that enabled them to create comfortable and functional living spaces in challenging natural environments. Evidence of intentional cave modifications, including floor leveling, drainage systems, and structural reinforcements, demonstrates technical knowledge and organizational capabilities that required both individual expertise and coordinated group labor. The time depth of Denisovan occupation at cave sites reveals cultural continuity spanning hundreds of thousands of years, suggesting social and technological traditions that were remarkably stable and successful over evolutionary timescales. Archaeological evidence indicates that basic Denisovan cultural patterns persisted with only gradual modifications across time periods that saw dramatic changes in climate, environment, and available resources. The geographic distribution of Denisovan archaeological remains suggests these people were not confined to marginal environments, but actively chose to colonize challenging territories that other human species avoided. Rather than being pushed into harsh environments by competition or population pressure, Denisovans appear to have deliberately exploited ecological niches that their biological and cultural adaptations made accessible to them, but not to their contemporaries. The extinction patterns evident in Denisovan archaeological sequences reveal a gradual decline rather than sudden disappearance, suggesting that these people were not eliminated by catastrophic events, but rather slowly absorbed into expanding modern human populations through interbreeding and cultural assimilation. This pattern of gradual integration rather than replacement has important implications for understanding how human populations interact during periods of contact and migration. The legacy of Denisovan biological and cultural adaptations extends far beyond their immediate contributions to human genetic diversity, encompassing technological innovations, environmental knowledge, and survival strategies that may have been crucial for the success of later human populations in Asian environments. Understanding who the Denisovans were provides essential context for appreciating how they built one of the most extensive and successful human societies in prehistoric Asia, setting the stage for understanding how their empire spread across an entire continent. The Denisova Cave sits like a frozen time capsule in the foothills of the Altai Mountains, its limestone chambers holding secrets that span nearly 400,000 years of human history. When Russian archaeologists first began systematic excavation of this remote Siberian cavern in the 1970s, they could never have imagined that they were uncovering the central headquarters of a human empire that had once stretched across an entire continent. Layer by layer, season by season, their careful work revealed evidence of the most successful and long-lasting human civilization that most people have never heard of. The cave itself is an impressive natural fortress, carved by ancient rivers into the limestone cliffs that overlook the Anui River Valley. Its main chamber stretches deep into the mountainside, with multiple levels and side passages that would have provided extensive living space for large communities. The strategic location offers commanding views of the surrounding valleys, while providing natural protection from the fierce Siberian winters and potential enemies. Fresh water from underground springs ensures a reliable supply even during the driest seasons, while the surrounding forests and grasslands would have provided abundant resources for hunting and gathering. The archaeological evidence preserved within the cave tells the story of a people who were not merely surviving in one of Earth's harshest environments, but thriving there for hundreds of millennia. The deepest layers of the cave contain stone tools and evidence of controlled fire use dating back nearly 400,000 years, indicating that human ancestors had been using this site since before modern humans had even evolved in Africa. These early occupants developed technologies and survival strategies that would prove so successful that their descendants would continue to use the same cave for thousands upon thousands of generations. The sophistication of Denisovan tool technology becomes apparent when examining the artifacts recovered from different layers of the cave. The earliest stone implements show basic but effective knapping techniques, producing sharp cutting edges and functional scraping surfaces from local raw materials. As the archaeological sequence progresses through time, the tools become increasingly sophisticated, showing evidence of advanced planning, specialized techniques, and aesthetic considerations that go beyond pure functionality. The most remarkable artifacts from the cave include bone tools that demonstrate extraordinary craftsmanship and technical innovation. Bone points for hunting spears show evidence of sophisticated hafting techniques that would have created composite weapons far superior to simple wooden spears. Bone needles with carefully drilled eyes indicate the ability to create tailored clothing essential for survival in Arctic conditions. Carved bone ornaments reveal artistic sensibilities and symbolic thinking that challenge assumptions about the cognitive capabilities of early human species. The famous chloridolite bracelet discovered in 2008 represents perhaps the most stunning example of Denisovan technological achievement. This polished green stone ornament required drilling techniques that modern experiments have shown to be extremely difficult to accomplish with prehistoric tools. The precision of the drill holes and the quality of the polished surface suggest manufacturing capabilities that approach those of much later civilizations. The fact that such an object was created not for practical purposes, but for personal adornment indicates a level of cultural sophistication that was previously unrecognized in prehistoric human societies. The evidence for controlled fire use at Denisova Cave reveals mastery of thermal energy that enabled these people to transform their harsh environment into a comfortable living space. Hearth areas show evidence of sustained fires maintained over extended periods, with carefully constructed fire pits that maximized heat output while minimizing smoke production within the enclosed cave environment. Ash deposits indicate the burning of a variety of fuel sources including wood, bone, and possibly coal or other fossil fuels that would have provided high-energy heat sources during the coldest periods. The cooking technologies evident from archaeological remains suggest that Denisovans had developed sophisticated food preparation techniques that maximize nutritional value while making difficult-to-digest foods more palatable and safer to consume. Evidence of roasted bones indicates techniques for extracting marrow and other nutrients that would have been crucial for maintaining health during long winter periods when fresh food was scarce. Charred plant remains suggest that these people had learned to process tough or potentially toxic plant foods through controlled burning and cooking. The organization of living spaces within the cave reveals social structures and community planning that required sophisticated cooperation and cultural transmission of architectural knowledge. Different areas of the cave appear to have been designated for specific activities, with distinct zones for sleeping, cooking, tool manufacturing, and waste disposal. This spatial organization could only have been maintained through cultural traditions that were passed down through generations and enforced through social mechanisms that ensured community cooperation. The evidence for clothing and textile production found within the cave indicates that Denisovans had developed clothing technologies that enabled them to maintain comfortable body temperatures even during extreme cold periods. Bone needles and other sewing implements suggest the ability to create fitted garments from animal hides and furs. The sophistication of these tools indicates that Denisovan clothing was not simply crude wrappings, but carefully constructed garments designed for specific purposes in environmental conditions. The hunting equipment recovered from the cave reveals weapons technologies that enabled Denisovans to successfully pursue some of the most dangerous and challenging prey animals in their environment. Spear points show evidence of hafting techniques that would have created highly effective composite weapons capable of penetrating thick hides and delivering lethal wounds to large animals. The variety of point styles suggests specialized weapons designed for different types of prey and hunting situations. The artistic achievements evident in Denisovan archaeological remains extend far beyond simple tool decoration to include objects that appear to have been created purely for aesthetic or symbolic purposes. Carved bone objects with complex geometric patterns may have served as personal ornaments, ritual objects, or forms of artistic expression that had meaning within Denisovan cultural systems. The investment of time and skill required to create these objects indicates that Denisovan communities had achieved sufficient resource security to support specialized artistic production. The evidence for long-distance travel and trade found within the cave includes materials that originated from sources hundreds of kilometers away, indicating either extensive mobility or participation in exchange networks that connected distant communities. Exotic stone materials used for tool production had to be transported across difficult terrain, suggesting that Denisovans had developed transportation technologies and route knowledge that enabled them to maintain contact with distant resource sources. The cave deposits contain evidence of continuous occupation spanning hundreds of thousands of years, with each generation building upon the knowledge and achievements of their predecessors. This cultural continuity represents one of the longest-lasting technological traditions in human history, demonstrating the effectiveness of Denisovan adaptation strategies and the stability of their social systems. The gradual evolution of tool technologies and living arrangements within the cave provides a unique window into how human cultures develop and change over evolutionary timescales. The seasonal patterns evident in the archaeological record reveal that Denisovans had developed sophisticated strategies for coping with the extreme seasonal variations, characteristic of their Siberian environment. Evidence suggests that cave occupation was most intensive during winter months when outdoor activities were limited by cold and darkness, while summer periods may have involved more dispersed activities, including hunting expeditions and resource gathering in the surrounding landscape. The demographic patterns that can be inferred from the archaeological evidence suggest that the cave was home to substantial communities that may have included dozens or even hundreds of individuals during peak occupation periods. The scale of debris accumulation and the extent of living areas within the cave indicate population densities that would have required sophisticated social organization and resource management strategies to maintain over extended periods. The defensive capabilities of the cave site suggest that Denisovans were aware of potential threats from other human groups and had chosen their headquarters location partly for its strategic advantages. The elevated position provides excellent visibility of approaching travelers, while the cave entrances could be easily defended by small numbers of defenders. These defensive considerations indicate that Denisovan communities existed within a landscape where competition or conflict with other groups was a real possibility. The resource management strategies evident from cave deposits reveal sophisticated understanding of sustainable exploitation techniques that enabled Denisovans to maintain their lifestyle for hundreds of thousands of years without depleting local resources. Evidence suggests careful hunting practices that targeted specific age classes of prey animals, seasonal scheduling of resource exploitation activities, and probably territorial systems that prevented overuse of critical resource areas. The technological innovations that emerge from analysis of Denisovan archaeological remains represent significant advances in human material culture that may have contributed to the success of later human populations in similar environments. Techniques for working bone, stone, and organic materials developed by Denisovans appear to have been adopted and further refined by subsequent peoples who occupied similar ecological niches across northern Asia. The cave evidence also reveals important information about Denisovan interactions with other human species who visited or occupied the same region. Archaeological layers containing both Denisovan and Neanderthal remains provide direct evidence of contact between these two human lineages, while the mixture of technological traditions suggests cultural exchange that went beyond simple territorial disputes to include sharing of knowledge and techniques. The environmental reconstruction possible through analysis of plant and animal remains found within the cave reveals the changing landscape that Denisovans inhabited over hundreds of thousands of years. These data provide crucial context for understanding how these people adapted to climate fluctuations, resource availability changes, and the arrival of new species including modern humans, who would eventually become their neighbors and genetic partners. The preservation conditions within the cave have enabled recovery of organic materials including DNA that provide unprecedented insights into Denisovan biology, genetics, and relationships with other human populations. The cold, stable environment created natural conditions for preserving genetic material that would have been destroyed in most other archaeological contexts, making Denisova Cave one of the most important sites for understanding human evolutionary history. The cave that served as headquarters for the Denisovan Empire was thus much more than a simple shelter or temporary refuge. It was a technological center, cultural repository, and social hub that enabled one of humanity's most successful prehistoric civilizations to flourish for hundreds of thousands of years in one of Earth's most challenging environments. The achievements preserved within its chambers demonstrate that the Denisovan Empire was built not on conquest or domination, but on technological innovation, environmental adaptation, and cultural traditions that prove remarkably stable and effective across evolutionary timescales. The journey from the frozen caves of Siberia to the roof of the world represents one of the most extraordinary achievements in human evolutionary history. When Denisovan pioneers first set out from their mountain strongholds to explore the vast landscapes of Asia, they embarked on a migration that would take their descendants across environments so diverse and challenging that no other human species had ever successfully colonized them all. From the windswept steppes of Mongolia to the oxygen-starved peaks of the Himalayas, from the tropical rainforests of Southeast Asia to the isolated islands beyond the horizon, Denisovan explorers pushed the boundaries of what was possible for human survival and adaptation. The first evidence that Denisovans had ventured far beyond their Siberian homeland came from an unlikely source, a single jawbone discovered in a cave high on the Tibetan plateau. The Baishya Karst Cave, perched at an elevation of 3,200 meters above sea level in the remote mountains of Gansu province, had yielded fragmentary human remains that puzzled archaeologists for years. The massive mandible with its oversized molars clearly belonged to an archaic human species, but its age and identity remained mysterious until protein analysis revealed its shocking secret. The jawbone belonged to a Denisovan who had lived on the Tibetan plateau at least 160,000 years ago, making this the earliest evidence for human presence at such extreme altitude in the archaeological record. This discovery revolutionized understanding of both Denisovan capabilities and the timeline of high-altitude human adaptation. The individual who had died in that cave had been living permanently at an elevation where modern humans without genetic adaptations would suffer severe altitude sickness and potentially fatal complications from oxygen deprivation. The physiological demands of surviving at such extreme altitude cannot be overstated. At 3,200 meters above sea level, atmospheric oxygen levels are reduced by nearly 25% compared to sea level conditions. The partial pressure of oxygen is so low that unacclimatized humans experience immediate symptoms, including headache, nausea, fatigue, and difficulty sleeping. Prolonged exposure without proper adaptation can lead to cerebral or pulmonary edema, life-threatening conditions that require immediate descent to lower altitudes for survival. Yet the Denisovan remains from Baishya Cave show no evidence of the stress indicators that would be expected if these people were struggling to survive in an unsuitable environment. The robust bone structure and well-developed muscle attachment sites suggest individuals who were not merely surviving, but thriving at extreme altitude. The size and wear patterns on the massive molars indicate a diet that included tough, fibrous plant materials that would have required significant chewing power to process, suggesting that these people had successfully adapted their subsistence strategies to high-altitude environments. The genetic basis for this remarkable adaptation had already been revealed through analysis of DNA from modern Tibetan populations, who possess variants of the EPAS1 gene that enable them to maintain normal activity levels at altitudes that would incapacitate most other humans. When researchers compared the ancient Denisovan genetic sequences with modern Tibetan genomes, they discovered that the high-altitude adaptation that allows contemporary Tibetans to live comfortably on the plateau had been inherited directly from their Denisovan ancestors. This genetic inheritance represents one of the most dramatic examples of adaptive introgression in human evolutionary history. The EPAS1 gene variants that Denisovans had evolved over hundreds of thousands of years of adaptation to high-altitude environments were passed on to modern human populations when the two species interbred. These genetic modifications were so beneficial for high-altitude survival that they rapidly spread through Tibetan populations, reaching near-fixation frequencies that indicate powerful natural selection favoring individuals who carried Denisovan-derived genetic variants. The physiological effects of these genetic adaptations are remarkable in their sophistication and effectiveness. The Denisovan-derived EPAS1 variants regulate red blood cell production in ways that maximize oxygen carrying capacity without creating the blood thickness that would strain cardiovascular systems. They enable efficient oxygen utilization at the cellular level while maintaining normal blood pressure and heart rate even during strenuous activity at extreme altitude. These adaptations represent a fundamental rewiring of human respiratory and circulatory physiology that took hundreds of thousands of years to evolve through natural selection. The successful colonization of the Tibetan Plateau by Denisovans required more than just physiological adaptations to low oxygen levels. The extreme environment of high-altitude Asia presents numerous additional challenges, including intense ultraviolet radiation, rapid temperature fluctuations, limited plant diversity, and seasonal resource scarcity that would have demanded comprehensive cultural and technological adaptations for long-term survival. The archaeological evidence from high-altitude Denisovan sites reveals sophisticated strategies for coping with these environmental challenges. Stone tool assemblages include specialized implements for processing plant foods that were available at high altitude, hunting equipment designed for pursuing prey animals adapted to mountain environments, and evidence for shelter construction techniques that provided protection from intense solar radiation and dramatic temperature swings between day and night. The expansion of Denisovan populations across Asia was not a single migration event, but rather a gradual process of exploration and colonization that took place over hundreds of thousands of years. Different Denisovan groups appear to have followed different routes and developed distinct adaptations to the various environments they encountered, creating a complex pattern of population dispersal and local adaptation that paralleled the geographic diversification seen in other successful mammalian species. The southern expansion of Denisovan populations into Southeast Asia required adaptations to completely different environmental challenges than those faced by their high-altitude relatives. The transition from cold, dry mountain environments to hot, humid tropical conditions would have demanded new strategies for thermoregulation, disease resistance, and resource exploitation. Archaeological evidence suggests that Denisovan populations successfully made these adaptations, establishing thriving communities throughout Southeast Asia and possibly beyond. The discovery of Denisovan remains in tropical environments has been limited by preservation conditions that rapidly destroy organic materials including bones and DNA. However, the genetic evidence for Denisovan ancestry in modern Southeast Asian populations provides clear documentation of their successful colonization of these regions. The distribution patterns of Denisovan genetic material in contemporary populations create a map of ancient migration routes and population interactions that reveals the extraordinary geographic scope of Denisovan expansion. The most remarkable aspect of Denisovan geographic expansion may be their apparent success in crossing significant water barriers to reach islands and landmasses that were separated from the Asian mainland by stretches of open ocean. Genetic evidence indicates that Denisovan populations reached not only the large islands of Indonesia and the Philippines, but also the distant landmasses of New Guinea and Australia, journeys that would have required sophisticated watercraft and navigation skills. The crossing of the Wallace Line, the biogeographic boundary between Asian and Australian fauna that has remained a significant barrier to species dispersal throughout evolutionary history, represents one of the most impressive achievements in Denisovan expansion. This marine barrier separated the Asian mainland from the Australian continent even during Ice Age periods when sea levels were much lower than today. Successful crossing would have required watercraft capable of traversing distances of at least 90 kilometers across open ocean, along with navigation skills sufficient to find relatively small target landmasses beyond the visible horizon. The technological requirements for successful oceanic voyaging by Denisovan populations would have included not only watercraft construction techniques, but also knowledge of weather patterns, seasonal winds, ocean currents, and celestial navigation methods. The development of such sophisticated maritime technologies among prehistoric human populations represents a remarkable intellectual and cultural achievement that required generations of accumulated knowledge and technological refinement. The evidence for Denisovan seafaring capabilities comes primarily from genetic analysis of modern populations in regions that could only have been reached by water. The substantial Denisovan genetic component found in Melanesian and Australian Aboriginal populations, combined with the geographic distribution of these genetic markers, provides compelling evidence that Denisovan populations had developed effective methods for long-distance ocean travel tens of thousands of years before such capabilities were documented in any other human populations. The watercraft that enabled Denisovan oceanic voyaging may have been sophisticated rafts constructed from bamboo or other plant materials that were abundant in Southeast Asian environments. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that such craft, when properly constructed and equipped, are capable of long-distance ocean voyages under favorable conditions. The technical knowledge required for construction and navigation of such vessels would have represented a sophisticated technological tradition that was maintained and transmitted across generations of maritime specialists. The cultural implications of successful Denisovan oceanic voyaging extend far beyond simple transportation technology to encompass complex social organizations capable of planning and executing long-distance exploration missions. Such expeditions would have required community consensus about resource allocation, selection and training of crew members, development of navigation knowledge, and establishment of supply networks to support extended voyages. These activities could only have emerged from societies with sophisticated leadership structures and cultural institutions. The colonization of new land masses by Denisovan populations would have required rapid adaptation to novel environments with unfamiliar resources, climate patterns, and potential threats. The success of these colonization efforts, as evidenced by the genetic legacy they left in modern populations, demonstrates remarkable cultural flexibility and adaptive capacity that enabled these people to establish viable communities in environments where they had no prior experience. The environmental diversity encountered by expanding Denisovan populations was extraordinary even by modern standards. Their geographic range ultimately encompassed Arctic tundra, temperate forests, grassland steppes, high mountain plateaus, tropical rainforests, coastal wetlands, and isolated islands with unique endemic flora and fauna. Success across such diverse environments required cultural knowledge systems capable of rapidly acquiring and applying new information about local resources, dangers, and opportunities. The temporal scope of Denisovan expansion across Asia spans hundreds of thousands of years, with the earliest evidence coming from high-altitude sites in Central Asia and the most recent from tropical lowland locations in Southeast Asia. This extended timeline suggests that Denisovan geographic expansion was not a rapid dispersal event, but rather a gradual process of exploration and adaptation that continued throughout their evolutionary history. The legacy of Denisovan geographic expansion continues to influence modern human populations across Asia and beyond through the genetic adaptations they developed for surviving in diverse environments. Contemporary populations living at high altitude, in tropical disease environments, or in other challenging locations, continue to benefit from genetic variants that were originally evolved by Denisovan populations who first colonized these regions hundreds of thousands of years ago. The achievement represented by Denisovan expansion across Asia stands as one of the most remarkable success stories in human evolutionary history, demonstrating capabilities for environmental adaptation and geographic colonization that enabled a single human lineage to establish thriving populations across an entire continent and beyond. Their success in conquering the roof of the world and expanding to the ends of the earth established the foundation for understanding how they would eventually encounter and interact with other human species who were beginning their own expansion out of Africa. The meeting of worlds that occurred across prehistoric Asia when Denisovans encountered their evolutionary cousins represents one of the most consequential events in human history. For hundreds of thousands of years, three distinct lineages of humanity had been evolving in isolation from each other, developing unique physical characteristics, cultural traditions, and genetic adaptations to their respective environments. When these separate branches of the human family tree finally came into contact during the late Pleistocene, the interactions that followed would reshape the genetic landscape of our species and determine the course of human evolution for all subsequent generations. The first encounters between Denisovans and Neanderthals likely occurred in the mountainous regions of Central Asia, where the geographic ranges of these two human species overlapped in the complex landscape of valleys, plateaus, and high passes that characterizes this part of the world. Both populations were cold-adapted peoples who had developed sophisticated technologies for survival in harsh northern environments. But their evolutionary histories had diverged hundreds of thousands of years earlier, creating two distinct approaches to human existence in challenging climates. The genetic evidence for these encounters comes from one of the most remarkable discoveries in the entire field of ancient DNA research: the identification of a bone fragment from Denisova Cave that belonged to a first-generation hybrid between a Denisovan father and a Neanderthal mother. This individual, affectionately nicknamed Denny by the research team that studied her remains, represents direct proof that these two human species not only encountered each other, but formed relationships intimate enough to produce offspring. The implications of Denny's existence extend far beyond simple documentation of interbreeding between human species. Her genetic makeup reveals that her Neanderthal mother belonged to a population that was itself mixed, carrying genetic material from at least two different Neanderthal lineages that had diverged from each other tens of thousands of years earlier. This suggests that the late Pleistocene period was characterized by complex patterns of migration, contact, and genetic exchange among human populations across a much wider geographic area than previously recognized. The analysis of Denny's genome also revealed that her Denisovan father belonged to a population that was genetically distinct from the Denisovans, whose remains had been found in other layers of the same cave, indicating that multiple Denisovan groups with different evolutionary histories were living in the same region during overlapping time periods. This genetic diversity within Denisovan populations suggests a complex social and demographic structure that may have included distinct tribes or communities with different territorial ranges and cultural traditions. The cultural interactions between Denisovans and Neanderthals can be inferred from archaeological evidence found in sites where both species appear to have been present. Stone tool technologies show evidence of technological exchange, with certain tool types that were characteristic of one species appearing in archaeological contexts associated with the other. This suggests that the relationship between these human cousins involved not just genetic exchange, but also cultural learning and technological transfer. The coexistence of Denisovans and Neanderthals in Central Asian environments would have required territorial arrangements and resource-sharing agreements that prevented destructive competition between groups that had similar ecological requirements. Both species were large-bodied carnivores who required substantial amounts of protein and calories to maintain their metabolisms, particularly during harsh winter periods when plant foods were unavailable and hunting success was critical for survival. The evidence suggests that rather than competing directly for the same resources, Denisovans and Neanderthals may have developed complementary subsistence strategies that allowed them to coexist in the same general regions, while focusing on different types of prey or different seasonal exploitation patterns. This type of resource partitioning would have required sophisticated cultural knowledge about territorial boundaries, hunting schedules, and resource availability that could only have been maintained through communication and cooperation between the two species. The encounter between Denisovans and modern humans represents an even more significant event in human evolutionary history, as it involved the meeting between the highly specialized Asian populations that had evolved in isolation for hundreds of thousands of years and the recently dispersed African populations that would eventually become the dominant human lineage across the globe. The genetic evidence indicates that these encounters occurred multiple times and in multiple locations as modern human populations expanded out of Africa and across Asia between 70 and 40,000 years ago. The timing and geographic distribution of these encounters can be reconstructed through analysis of Denisovan genetic material found in modern human populations around the world. The patterns of Denisovan ancestry in contemporary peoples reveal that interbreeding occurred not just once, but multiple times, involving different Denisovan populations and different waves of modern human migration. This complex pattern of genetic exchange suggests that the relationship between these two human species was characterized by repeated contact over thousands of years, rather than isolated encounters. The most substantial Denisovan genetic contribution to modern humans occurred in populations that eventually reached Melanesia, New Guinea, and Australia, where contemporary people carry approximately 5% Denisovan DNA in their genomes. This high level of genetic contribution indicates extensive interbreeding that went far beyond occasional encounters to include sustained relationships and probably the incorporation of entire Denisovan communities into expanding modern human populations. The lower but still significant levels of Denisovan ancestry found in mainland Asian populations, typically ranging from 0.2 to 0.5%, suggest different patterns of interaction that may have involved less extensive interbreeding or perhaps the dilution of Denisovan genetic contributions through subsequent demographic expansion and population mixing. These differences in Denisovan ancestry levels across different modern human populations provide clues about the specific circumstances and geographic locations where interbreeding occurred. The technological and cultural implications of contact between Denisovans and modern humans are more difficult to document directly, but can be inferred from archaeological evidence and from the types of genetic adaptations that were transferred between the species. The fact that modern humans acquired beneficial genetic variants from Denisovans suggests that these encounters involved not just genetic exchange, but also cultural learning that may have included technological innovations, environmental knowledge, and survival strategies. The high-altitude adaptations that modern humans inherited from Denisovans represent perhaps the clearest example of how interbreeding provided immediate and substantial benefits to modern human populations attempting to colonize challenging environments. Modern humans expanding into high-altitude regions of Asia would have faced the same physiological challenges that had driven the evolution of specialized adaptations in Denisovan populations over hundreds of thousands of years. The acquisition of Denisovan genetic variants that enhanced high-altitude survival would have provided modern humans with immediate access to evolutionary adaptations that would have taken hundreds of thousands of years to develop through natural selection. This genetic inheritance enabled modern human population to successfully colonize high-altitude environments much more rapidly than would have been possible through independent adaptation, providing a crucial advantage during the period of rapid geographic expansion that characterized modern human dispersal. The immune system benefits that modern humans gained from Denisovan interbreeding may have been equally important for successful colonization of Asian environments. Denisovan populations had been exposed to Asian-specific pathogens for hundreds of thousands of years, developing immune system variants that provided protection against diseases that would have been completely novel to recently arrived modern human populations from Africa. The transfer of these immune system adaptations through interbreeding would have provided modern humans with immediate protection against local diseases that could otherwise have prevented successful colonization or caused devastating epidemics in newly arrived populations. This genetic protection may have been crucial for the survival of modern human communities in environments where local pathogens pose serious threats to individuals without appropriate immune system adaptations. The cultural knowledge that Denisovans may have shared with modern humans could have included detailed information about local environments, seasonal patterns, resource locations, and survival techniques that had been refined over hundreds of thousands of years of adaptation to Asian conditions. This type of ecological knowledge would have been invaluable for modern human populations, attempting to establish themselves in unfamiliar environments, where mistakes in resource assessment or seasonal planning could prove fatal. The evidence for technological transfer between Denisovans and modern humans is more indirect, but may be reflected in the sophisticated tool technologies and symbolic behaviors that appear in the archaeological record of modern human sites in Asia. Some technological innovations that appear during the period of contact may represent independent modern human developments, but others could reflect knowledge acquired through interaction with Denisovan populations who had already been experimenting with advanced technologies for hundreds of thousands of years. The social and political dimensions of contact between Denisovans and modern humans remain largely speculative, but were probably complex and varied depending on specific circumstances and the relative population sizes of the groups involved. Some encounters may have involved peaceful integration and gradual cultural exchange, while others might have been characterized by competition or conflict over resources and territory. The demographic impact of modern human expansion on Denisovan populations was ultimately decisive in determining the outcome of these encounters. Modern humans were part of a larger demographic expansion that was occurring across the globe during this time period, with rapidly growing populations that had the numerical advantage to eventually overwhelm smaller Denisovan communities, even if individual encounters were peaceful or resulted in temporary coexistence. The process by which Denisovan populations were absorbed into expanding modern human communities appears to have been gradual rather than sudden, with genetic evidence suggesting that interbreeding continued over thousands of years rather than ending abruptly. This pattern suggests that the relationship between the two species was characterized more by demographic assimilation than by conflict or displacement, with Denisovan populations gradually becoming integrated into larger modern human communities. The final disappearance of recognizably distinct Denisovan populations from the archaeological record around 30,000 years ago coincides with the period of maximum modern human demographic expansion across Asia. By this time, the genetic and cultural contributions of Denisovan populations had been incorporated into modern human communities, but distinct Denisovan societies with their own cultural traditions and territorial arrangements had ceased to exist. The legacy of these encounters between human species extends far beyond the immediate genetic and cultural exchanges that occurred during the contact period. The interbreeding between Denisovans, Neanderthals, and modern humans created a genetic foundation for human populations that combined the best adaptive features that had evolved in different environments over hundreds of thousands of years of independent evolution. This genetic recombination enabled modern human populations to rapidly colonize environments ranging from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforests, from high mountain plateaus to oceanic islands, drawing on adaptive solutions that had been developed by different human lineages over vast periods of evolutionary time. The success of modern humans in becoming a global species was built partly on the genetic and cultural foundations provided by their encounters with Denisovan and Neanderthal populations. The scientific understanding of these ancient encounters has been revolutionized by advances in ancient DNA technology that have made it possible to directly analyze genetic material from bones that are tens of thousands of years old. The ability to recover and sequence ancient genomes has transformed our understanding of human evolutionary history from a story based primarily on fossil morphology to a detailed genetic narrative that reveals the complex patterns of migration, contact, and interbreeding that shaped our species. The continuing discovery of new Denisovan and Neanderthal genetic contributions to modern human populations suggests that our understanding of these ancient encounters is still incomplete. As ancient DNA technology continues to improve and new archaeological sites are discovered, additional evidence for contact between human species will likely emerge, further complicating and enriching our understanding of this crucial period in human evolutionary history. The story of contact between Denisovans and their evolutionary cousins ultimately demonstrates that human evolution was not a simple linear progression from primitive to advanced forms, but rather a complex network of interactions between different human lineages that exchange genetic material, cultural knowledge, and technological innovations. These encounters between human species represent some of the most important events in our evolutionary history, shaping the genetic and cultural foundations that enabled our species to become the remarkably adaptable and successful global population the blood that flows through the veins of billions of people across Asia and the Pacific carries within it an ancient inheritance that has remained hidden for tens of thousands of years. Every heartbeat pumps genetic material that was first shaped in the caves of Siberia, refined on the windswept plateaus of Tibet, and tested in the tropical forests of Southeast Asia by people whose very existence was unknown until a few years ago. The Denisovan legacy lives not in museums or archaeological sites, but in the most intimate biological processes that keep us alive, breathing, and thriving in environments that would have killed our purely African ancestors. The discovery that modern humans carry substantial amounts of Denisovan DNA came as one of the greatest surprises in the history of human genetics. When researchers first began comparing ancient Denisovan genomes with those of contemporary populations around the world, they expected to find perhaps trace amounts of archaic genetic material similar to the small percentages of Neanderthal DNA that had been detected in European and Asian populations. Instead, they discovered that some modern human groups carry genetic contributions from Denisovans that are so substantial they fundamentally alter our understanding of what it means to be human. The people of Melanesia, Papua New Guinea, and Aboriginal Australia carry the highest levels of Denisovan ancestry found anywhere in the world, with individual genomes containing as much as 6% genetic material inherited from these ancient Asian people. This represents a genetic contribution that is large enough to influence virtually every aspect of human biology, from basic metabolic processes to sophisticated cognitive functions. The Denisovan DNA found in these populations is not randomly distributed throughout their genomes, but is concentrated in regions that affect crucial survival functions, including immune system response, metabolism, and neurological development. The distribution pattern of Denisovan genetic material across different modern human populations creates a map of ancient migration routes and population interactions that reveals the extraordinary scope of Denisovan influence on human evolution. Mainland Asian populations, including Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and Southeast Asian peoples, carry lower but still significant levels of Denisovan ancestry, typically ranging from 0.2 to 0.4% of their total genetic material. Even these seemingly small percentages represent millions of DNA base pairs that continue to influence the biology of hundreds of millions of people. The most remarkable aspect of Denisovan genetic inheritance is not simply its presence in modern human populations, but the specific functions that these ancient genetic variants continue to perform. Rather than being evolutionary relics or neutral genetic material that persists without function, many Denisovan genetic contributions provide active benefits that enhance survival and reproduction in specific environmental conditions. This pattern of beneficial inheritance suggests that interbreeding with Denisovans provided modern humans with immediate access to genetic adaptations that had been refined over hundreds of thousands of years of natural selection. The high-altitude adaptations that modern Tibetans inherited from Denisovans represent perhaps the most dramatic example of beneficial genetic inheritance from archaic human populations. The EPAS1 gene variants that enable Tibetans to live comfortably at elevations above 4,000 meters are found at frequencies approaching 100% in high-altitude populations, indicating that virtually every Tibetan person carries this Denisovan genetic gift. Without this inheritance, the Tibetan Plateau would likely remain largely uninhabitable by human populations, as demonstrated by the severe altitude sickness experienced by lowland visitors who lack these genetic adaptations. The physiological effects of Denisovan-derived high-altitude adaptations extend far beyond simple oxygen processing to include comprehensive modifications of cardiovascular, respiratory, and metabolic systems that work together to maintain normal function in low-oxygen environments. These genetic variants regulate red blood cell production to optimize oxygen carrying capacity without creating dangerous blood thickness, modify heart and lung function to maximize efficiency at low atmospheric pressure, and alter cellular metabolism to function effectively with reduced oxygen availability. The immune system benefits provided by Denisovan genetic inheritance may be even more widespread and significant than high-altitude adaptations, though they are less visible because they operate at the molecular level to prevent diseases rather than enabling obvious capabilities like high-altitude performance. Modern human populations across Asia carry Denisovan-derived immune system variants that provide protection against pathogens that were prevalent in Asian environments for hundreds of thousands of years before modern humans arrived from Africa. These immune system adaptations include variants of genes that regulate inflammatory responses, control autoimmune reactions, and coordinate cellular defenses against viral, bacterial, and parasitic infections. The specific pathogens that drove the evolution of these immune system adaptations in Denisovan populations included diseases transmitted by animals and insects that were unique to Asian environments, as well as crowd diseases that emerged as human populations became larger and more densely settled. The inheritance of Denisovan immune system variants provided modern human populations with immediate protection against local diseases that could otherwise have prevented successful colonization of Asian environments or caused devastating epidemics among newly arrived populations. This genetic protection was probably crucial for the rapid demographic expansion that enabled modern humans to establish large and successful populations across Asia within relatively few generations of their initial arrival. The neurological and cognitive implications of Denisovan genetic inheritance remain less well understood than immune system and physiological adaptations. But emerging research suggests that some Denisovan genetic variants may influence brain development and function in ways that enhance specific types of cognitive performance. These potential cognitive effects are among the most intriguing and controversial aspects of Denisovan genetic inheritance, as they raise fundamental questions about the relationship between genetic variation and human intellectual capabilities. Some genetic variants found in modern Asian populations that appear to have Denisovan origins are associated with genes that regulate brain development, neural connectivity, and neurotransmitter function. While it is important to emphasize that intelligence is a complex trait influenced by many genetic and environmental factors, the possibility that some cognitive capabilities may have been enhanced through genetic inheritance from Denisovans represents an active area of current research. The metabolic adaptations that modern humans inherited from Denisovans include genetic variants that affect energy production, fat storage, and temperature regulation in ways that enhance survival in cold environments. These adaptations may help explain why some modern Asian populations show distinctive metabolic profiles that include enhanced cold tolerance, different patterns of fat distribution, and modified responses to dietary variations compared to populations with purely African ancestry. The cold adaptation genetic variants inherited from Denisovans include modifications to genes that regulate blood vessel function in extremities, preventing frostbite and maintaining dexterity in cold conditions. Other variants affect metabolic rate and calorie burning patterns in ways that optimize energy utilization during cold stress while maintaining body temperature within normal ranges during extended exposure to low temperatures. The diving and underwater adaptations that may have been inherited from Denisovans by some Southeast Asian populations represent another example of highly specialized genetic variants that enhance performance in specific environmental conditions. Some modern populations, including the Bayao people of Southeast Asia, show remarkable diving capabilities that may partly reflect genetic inheritance from Denisovan ancestors who developed these adaptations during their expansion into coastal and island environments. The genetic basis for enhanced diving performance includes variants that affect oxygen storage in blood and muscles, cardiovascular responses to breath holding, and possibly even modifications to inner ear structure that enhance underwater orientation and pressure tolerance. While the extent to which these capabilities reflect Denisovan genetic inheritance versus more recent local adaptation remains an active area of research, the possibility that some modern human diving abilities trace back to Denisovan ancestors adds another dimension to our understanding of this genetic legacy. The geographic distribution of different types of Denisovan genetic inheritance provides clues about the specific environmental challenges that different Denisovan populations faced and the solutions they evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. The concentration of high-altitude adaptations in Central Asian populations reflects the mountain environments where these Denisovan groups lived, while immune system variants show broader distribution patterns that reflect the disease environments encountered across the full range of Denisovan expansion. The timing of genetic inheritance from Denisovans can sometimes be estimated through analysis of the genetic diversity surrounding Denisovan-derived variants in modern populations. Some Denisovan genetic contributions appear to have been acquired relatively recently during the initial contact between Denisovans and modern humans, while others show evidence of more ancient inheritance that may reflect multiple episodes of interbreeding over extended time periods. The population genetics of Denisovan inheritance reveals that different modern human groups acquire genetic material from different Denisovan populations, creating a complex pattern of ancestry that reflects the geographic and temporal diversity of ancient human interactions. Some modern populations carry genetic material from Denisovan groups that were themselves highly divergent, representing lineages that had been separated for hundreds of thousands of years before contributing to modern human gene pools. The medical implications of Denisovan genetic inheritance are only beginning to be understood as researchers develop more sophisticated methods for analyzing the functional effects of genetic variants in different environmental and cultural contexts. Some Denisovan-derived genetic variants that provided benefits in ancient environments may have different effects in modern contexts, potentially influencing susceptibility to contemporary diseases or responses to modern medical treatments. The pharmaceutical industry has begun to take interest in Denisovan genetic variants as potential targets for drug development, particularly in areas related to high-altitude medicine, cold adaptation, and immune system function. Understanding how Denisovan genetic variants affect human physiology could lead to new therapeutic approaches for treating altitude sickness, autoimmune diseases, and other conditions that involve the biological systems modified by these ancient genetic adaptations. The conservation of Denisovan genetic material in modern human populations represents one of the most successful examples of genetic rescue in evolutionary history. Rather than simply disappearing when Denisovan populations were absorbed into expanding modern human communities, the genetic adaptations they had developed were preserved and continue to benefit their descendants tens of thousands of years later. The study of Denisovan genetic inheritance has revolutionized our understanding of human genetic diversity and its relationship to environmental adaptation. Rather than viewing genetic differences between human populations as neutral variations or historical accidents. We now recognize that much of this diversity represents functional adaptations to different environmental challenges that continue to provide benefits to modern populations living in similar conditions. The Denisovan genetic legacy demonstrates that human evolution did not end with the emergence of modern humans, but continued through genetic exchange with other human species that had evolved different solutions to the challenges of survival in diverse environments. This ongoing evolution through interbreeding enabled modern humans to rapidly acquire genetic adaptations that would have taken hundreds of thousands of years to develop through independent natural selection, accelerating our species' ability to colonize and thrive in environments around the world. Beneath the tropical soils of Southeast Asia, hidden in limestone caves carved by ancient rivers, and scattered across remote islands that few scientists have ever visited, lies evidence of a lost civilization that once stretched across an entire continent. The Denisovan Empire was not built of stone monuments or metal artifacts that could survive tens of thousands of years of tropical decay, but of organic materials and genetic adaptations that have left only the faintest traces for modern archaeologists to discover. Yet piece by piece, fragment by fragment, researchers are uncovering evidence of human societies that achieve levels of sophistication and geographic reach that rival any civilization in human history. The challenge of documenting Denisovan civilization lies in the environments where these people lived and the materials they used to build their societies. Unlike the dry caves and cold climates that have preserved Neanderthal remains for tens of thousands of years, the tropical and subtropical regions where most Denisovan populations lived create conditions that rapidly destroy organic materials, including bones, wood, and other biological substances. The hot, humid conditions and acidic soils that characterize much of Southeast Asia dissolve calcium-based materials like bones and teeth within decades or centuries, leaving virtually no direct fossil evidence of the people who once lived there. This preservation problem means that our understanding of Denisovan civilization must be reconstructed primarily from indirect evidence, including genetic analysis of modern populations, environmental reconstructions based on climatic data, and careful analysis of the few archaeological sites where preservation conditions have been favorable enough to maintain traces of ancient human occupation. Each piece of evidence provides only a small window into what was once a vast and complex world of human societies adapted to Asian environments. The genetic evidence for Denisovan population size and distribution suggests that at their peak, these people may have numbered in the hundreds of thousands or even millions of individuals spread across territories that encompass much of Asia, from Siberia to Indonesia and possibly beyond. The genetic diversity found within Denisovan populations indicates that they were divided into numerous distinct groups that had adapted to different environmental conditions, while maintaining enough contact to prevent complete reproductive isolation. The geographic scope of Denisovan civilization can be mapped through analysis of genetic contributions to modern human populations, which creates a pattern of ancient presence that extends from the Arctic tundra of Siberia to the tropical islands of Southeast Asia. This distribution suggests that Denisovan populations had successfully adapted to virtually every major environment type found across the Asian continent, developing specialized technologies and cultural practices appropriate to each ecological zone. The temporal depth of Denisovan civilization extends back at least 400,000 years, based on the earliest archaeological evidence from Denisova Cave, and may reach back even further as new sites are discovered and dating techniques are refined. This represents one of the longest-lasting continuous cultural traditions in human history, spanning time periods that saw dramatic changes in global climate, sea level, and available resources. The technological achievements of Denisovan civilization can be inferred from the sophisticated artifacts found at sites like Denisova Cave, which represent only the most durable examples of what was certainly a much more extensive material culture. The precision drilling and polishing techniques evident in the famous chloridolite bracelet suggest mastery of complex manufacturing processes that required specialized tools, accumulated technical knowledge, and probably full-time craft specialists who devoted their careers to perfecting particular skills. The artistic sensibilities evident in Denisovan archaeological remains indicate aesthetic traditions that valued beauty and symbolic expression alongside purely functional considerations. The creation of decorative objects that serve no obvious practical purpose suggests that Denisovan societies had achieved sufficient resource security and social organization to support specialized artistic production and to value cultural activities beyond immediate survival needs. The evidence for long-distance trade and cultural exchange found at Denisovan sites indicates participation in networks that connected communities across vast distances and diverse environments. Materials found in Denisovan contexts that originated from sources hundreds or thousands of kilometers away suggest either extensive mobility by individual groups or participation in exchange systems that linked distant populations through chains of intermediary communities. The social organization required to maintain these long-distance connections would have demanded sophisticated communication systems, standardized exchange protocols, and probably specialized roles for individuals who served as traders, guides, or cultural ambassadors between different communities. The coordination of such networks across the geographic scope suggested by genetic evidence would have required institutional structures and cultural practices of remarkable sophistication and stability. The environmental knowledge that enabled Denisovan populations to successfully colonize such diverse environments represents one of their greatest intellectual achievements. The ability to identify edible plants, predict weather patterns, locate water sources, and avoid dangerous animals or environmental hazards in unfamiliar territories would have required accumulated wisdom that was carefully preserved and transmitted across generations of explorers and settlers. The agricultural or proto-agricultural practices that may have been developed by some Denisovan populations remain largely unknown due to preservation problems. But the successful colonization of environments with limited natural food resources suggests that these people may have developed techniques for enhancing the productivity of wild plant and animal populations. Such practices could have included selective harvesting, habitat modification, or even early forms of domestication that increase the carrying capacity of marginal environments. The architectural traditions of Denisovan civilization are mostly lost to time and tropical decay, but the evidence for sophisticated cave modifications and the inference of substantial population sizes suggests that these people had developed effective techniques for creating comfortable and functional living spaces in diverse environmental conditions. The ability to maintain large communities in challenging environments would have required advanced knowledge of construction techniques, sanitation systems, and resource management practices. The religious and spiritual traditions of Denisovan civilization can only be inferred from the limited artistic and symbolic evidence found in archaeological contexts, but the sophistication of their material culture suggests that these people had developed complex belief systems and ceremonial practices. The creation of decorative objects and the apparent care taken in their manufacture and use suggests that Denisovan societies valued symbolic expression and possibly ritual activities that reinforce social bonds and cultural identity. The linguistic diversity that probably characterized Denisovan civilization is completely lost to us, but the geographic scope and temporal depth of their societies suggests that they may have developed numerous distinct languages and dialects adapted to different environmental and social conditions. The communication challenges involved in maintaining contact across such vast territories would have required either remarkable linguistic flexibility or sophisticated systems for translation and cultural mediation. The knowledge systems that enabled Denisovan success in diverse environments would have included detailed understanding of astronomy for navigation, seasonal cycles for resource planning, animal behavior for hunting, plant properties for medicine and food, and materials science for tool and artifact production. The preservation and transmission of such complex knowledge across hundreds of generations would have required sophisticated educational institutions and cultural practices. The demographic patterns that characterize Denisovan civilization can be partially reconstructed through genetic analysis, which suggests that these populations experienced periods of expansion and contraction that probably reflected environmental changes, resource availability, and interactions with other human groups. The successful colonization of new territories would have required careful population management to ensure that pioneer communities had sufficient genetic diversity and cultural knowledge to establish viable settlements. The decline and eventual disappearance of recognizably distinct Denisovan populations represents one of the great mysteries in human evolutionary history. The timing of this decline, which appears to have occurred between 50 and 30,000 years ago, coincides with the period of modern human expansion across Asia, suggesting that demographic competition or integration with modern human populations played a role in the end of Denisovan civilization. The process by which Denisovan populations were absorbed into expanding modern human communities appears to have been gradual rather than sudden, with genetic evidence suggesting that interbreeding and cultural exchange continued over thousands of years. This pattern suggests that the end of Denisovan civilization was not the result of conquest or displacement, but rather a process of demographic integration that preserved many of their genetic and cultural contributions, while ending their existence as distinct societies. The archaeological invisibility of Denisovan civilization in most tropical environments means that new discoveries have the potential to dramatically change our understanding of these ancient people and their achievements. Each new site that preserves organic materials or each new technique for extracting information from degraded archaeological contexts brings the possibility of revealing aspects of Denisovan culture that are currently unknown. The potential for discovering intact Denisovan sites in unexpected locations remains high, particularly in environments where preservation conditions may have been more favorable than in typical tropical settings. Cave systems, high-altitude locations, and sites that were rapidly buried by geological processes all offer possibilities for finding archaeological evidence that could revolutionize our understanding of Denisovan civilization. The integration of genetic, archaeological, and environmental evidence continues to reveal new aspects of Denisovan civilization that were previously unknown or poorly understood. Each advance in analytical techniques or each new data set provides additional pieces of the puzzle that help reconstruct the scope and sophistication of these lost societies. The recognition that Denisovan civilization was not a marginal or primitive phenomenon, but rather one of the most successful and long-lasting human societies in history, has profound implications for our understanding of human evolutionary potential and the factors that determine the success or failure of human civilizations. Their achievements demonstrate that human creativity and adaptability can overcome almost any environmental challenge given sufficient time and appropriate cultural innovations. The legacy of Denisovan civilization extends far beyond their genetic contributions to modern human populations to include technological innovations, environmental management practices, and cultural traditions that may have influenced the subsequent development of Asian societies. Understanding this legacy requires piecing together evidence from multiple sources to reconstruct a world that has been hidden beneath layers of time and tropical decay for tens of thousands. The final chapter of Denisovan existence as an independent human lineage began not with violence or catastrophe, but with the gradual appearance of new people on the Asian horizon, whose expanding populations would eventually absorb the ancient civilization that had thrived across the continent for hundreds of thousands of years. The disappearance of Denisovans represents one of the most mysterious transitions in human history, a process that was so gradual and complete that these remarkable people vanished from the archaeological record, while leaving behind only genetic traces of their former existence embedded in the DNA of their descendants. The timing of Denisovan decline coincides with one of the most significant demographic events in human evolutionary history, the expansion of modern human populations out of Africa and across the globe during the period between 70 and 30,000 years ago. This expansion represented not just the geographic spread of a single human species, but a demographic revolution that would ultimately result in modern humans becoming the only surviving human lineage on Earth, while all other human species disappeared from the fossil record. The initial encounters between expanding modern human populations and established Denisovan communities probably occurred in Central Asia and Southeast Asia, regions where both groups would have been competing for similar resources and territories. However, unlike the dramatic population replacements that occurred in some other parts of the world during modern human expansion, the interaction between Denisovans and modern humans appears to have been characterized more by integration than by conflict or displacement. The genetic evidence for this integration process comes from the substantial amounts of Denisovan DNA found in modern human populations across Asia and the Pacific, which indicates that interbreeding between the two species was extensive enough to ensure that Denisovan genetic material was incorporated into modern human gene pools at levels that have persisted for tens of thousands of years. This pattern suggests that rather than being eliminated by modern human expansion, Denisovan populations were gradually absorbed into larger modern human communities through intermarriage and cultural assimilation. The demographic mechanics of this absorption process would have been driven partly by differences in population size and growth rate between Denisovan and modern human groups. Archaeological evidence suggests that while Denisovan populations had achieved impressive geographic distribution and cultural sophistication, their total numbers were probably relatively small compared to the rapidly expanding modern human populations that were spreading across Asia during this period. The smaller size of Denisovan populations would have made them vulnerable to genetic and cultural assimilation by larger modern human groups, particularly if interbreeding was common and socially accepted. Each generation of mixed marriages would have resulted in offspring who carried both Denisovan and modern human genetic material, but who were increasingly integrated into modern human cultural systems and social networks. The cultural factors that facilitated this integration process may have included similarities in technology, social organization, and subsistence strategies that made cooperation and intermarriage between Denisovan and modern human groups both practical and beneficial for both parties. The evidence for technological exchange between these human species suggests that they shared enough cultural common ground to enable communication and collaboration even across species boundaries. The environmental pressures that may have contributed to Denisovan decline include climate changes that occurred during the late Pleistocene period, which created new challenges for populations that had adapted to specific environmental conditions over hundreds of thousands of years. The global cooling that characterized much of this period, followed by rapid warming and environmental change, would have disrupted established subsistence patterns and possibly forced population movements that brought different human groups into closer contact. The competitive pressures that Denisovan populations faced from expanding modern human groups may have been intensified by technological innovations that gave modern humans advantages in resource exploitation, hunting efficiency, or territorial defense. While Denisovan populations had developed sophisticated technologies appropriate to their environments, modern humans were part of a larger network of cultural exchange that may have enabled more rapid technological innovation and adaptation. The disease factors that may have contributed to Denisovan population decline remain largely speculative, but could have included pathogens introduced by modern human populations to which Denisovan groups had no previous exposure. The demographic expansion of modern humans would have created opportunities for disease transmission between previously isolated populations, potentially causing epidemics that disproportionately affected smaller Denisovan communities. The social and political dimensions of Denisovan decline may have involved gradual changes in leadership structures, territorial arrangements, and cultural practices that favored integration with modern human communities over maintenance of distinct Denisovan identities. Young people in mixed communities may have been increasingly attracted to modern human cultural practices and social networks, leading to gradual erosion of traditional Denisovan institutions and customs. The linguistic aspects of Denisovan decline probably involved the gradual replacement of Denisovan languages with languages spoken by modern human populations, though this process may have also resulted in the incorporation of Denisovan vocabulary and linguistic features into the languages of mixed communities. The loss of distinct Denisovan languages would have represented a crucial step in the disappearance of these people as culturally distinct groups. The religious and spiritual dimensions of Denisovan decline may have involved the gradual abandonment of traditional Denisovan belief systems in favor of religious practices associated with modern human cultures. However, some Denisovan spiritual traditions may have been incorporated into syncretic belief systems that combined elements from both cultural backgrounds, preserving aspects of Denisovan worldview within modern human religious frameworks. The archaeological evidence for the final phases of Denisovan existence is frustratingly limited due to preservation problems in tropical environments and the gradual nature of the integration process. The latest definitely attributable Denisovan remains come from sites that are approximately 30 to 40,000 years old. But the process of genetic and cultural integration may have continued for thousands of years after the disappearance of recognizably distinct Denisovan archaeological signatures. The genetic analysis of modern human populations reveals that different Denisovan groups disappeared at different times and through different processes, with some lineages being absorbed into modern human populations earlier than others. This pattern suggests that the decline of Denisovan populations was not a single event, but rather a complex process that varied according to local circumstances and the specific characteristics of different Denisovan communities. The geographic patterns of Denisovan disappearance can be partially reconstructed through analysis of the distribution and timing of genetic contributions to modern human populations. Some regions appear to have maintained Denisovan populations longer than others, possibly reflecting environmental factors, population densities, or cultural practices that influence the rate of integration with modern human groups. The possibility that some Denisovan populations may have survived longer than currently recognized remains an active area of research, particularly in remote regions where archaeological investigation has been limited and where preservation conditions may have been unfavorable for maintaining recognizable traces of ancient human occupation. The discovery of new sites or the development of new analytical techniques could potentially extend the known timeline of Denisovan existence. The cultural legacy of Denisovan populations extends beyond their genetic contributions to include technological innovations, environmental knowledge, and social practices that may have been adopted by modern human communities during the integration process. Some aspects of Asian cultures that are typically attributed to independent modern human innovation may actually represent continuations of earlier Denisovan traditions that were preserved through cultural transmission. The psychological and social impacts of Denisovan disappearance on surviving populations are impossible to assess directly, but may have included trauma associated with the loss of distinct cultural identities, disruption of traditional social networks, and challenges involved in adapting to new cultural systems. The process of integration would have required significant cultural learning and adaptation on the part of both Denisovan and modern human individuals. The evolutionary implications of Denisovan disappearance include the loss of genetic diversity that had accumulated over hundreds of thousands of years of independent evolution, though some of this diversity was preserved through interbreeding with modern human populations. The absorption of Denisovan populations also contributed to the genetic diversity of modern human groups, providing adaptive advantages that continue to benefit contemporary populations. The modern search for evidence of late surviving Denisovan populations or their descendants has focused partly on isolated populations in remote regions of Asia who might retain higher levels of Denisovan ancestry or distinctive physical characteristics that could indicate more recent Denisovan genetic contributions. While no such populations have been definitively identified, the possibility remains that some communities may preserve genetic or cultural legacies that reflect more direct connections to ancient Denisovan lineages. The mythological and folkloric traditions of Asian cultures include numerous references to encounters with strange or different types of people who may represent cultural memories of contact with Denisovan populations. Stories of giants, forest people, or other non-standard humans found in oral traditions across Asia could potentially preserve memories of actual historical encounters between modern human and Denisovan groups. The scientific investigation of Denisovan disappearance continues to reveal new aspects of this process through advances in ancient DNA analysis, archaeological techniques, and computational methods for analyzing complex genetic and demographic data. Each new discovery provides additional pieces of the puzzle that help explain how one of humanity's most successful prehistoric civilizations came to an end, while simultaneously contributing to the success of their modern human successors. The philosophical implications of Denisovan disappearance raise fundamental questions about the nature of human identity, the relationship between different human lineages, and the factors that determine which cultural traditions survive and which are lost to time. Their story demonstrates that even highly successful human societies can disappear completely while still contributing to the ongoing evolution of human civilization through the genetic and cultural legacies they leave behind. The contemporary relevance of understanding Denisovan disappearance lies partly in the insights it provides about how human populations respond to demographic pressure, environmental change, and cultural contact. The processes that led to the absorption of Denisovan populations into modern human communities may provide models for understanding similar demographic transitions that continue to occur in the contemporary world as different human groups encounter each other under conditions of rapid social and environmental change. In the sterile laboratories of the world's most advanced genetic research facilities, scientists are engaged in what might be the most ambitious archaeological project in human history. the systematic search for living Denisovans hidden within the DNA of contemporary populations around the globe. Using technologies that can read genetic sequences at the level of individual molecules, researchers are discovering that the ancient people we thought had vanished tens of thousands of years ago may still be walking among us, their biological essence preserved in the genetic makeup of millions of their descendants who carry forward the legacy of humanity's forgotten empire. The revolution in genomic technology that has made this genetic archaeology possible represents one of the most dramatic advances in scientific capability since the invention of the microscope. Modern DNA sequencing machines can process entire human genomes in a matter of hours, reading billions of genetic letters with accuracy that approaches perfection. When these technologies are applied to the genomes of people from populations that have had limited contact with the outside world, they reveal genetic signatures that tell stories of ancient migrations, population encounters, and evolutionary adaptations that occurred tens of thousands of years before written history began. The search for contemporary Denisovan ancestry has focused particularly on populations in remote regions of Asia and the Pacific, where geographic isolation may have preserved higher concentrations of ancient genetic material and where cultural traditions might maintain connections to prehistoric ways of life. These investigations have revealed that some modern populations carry Denisovan genetic contributions that are significantly higher than previously recognized, suggesting that the integration between Denisovans and modern humans was even more extensive than genetic analysis of typical populations had indicated. The highest levels of Denisovan ancestry found in any contemporary population belong to the people of Papua New Guinea and surrounding regions of Melanesia, where individual genomes can contain as much as 6% genetic material inherited from Denisovan ancestors. This level of genetic contribution is so substantial that it influences virtually every aspect of human biology, from basic physiological processes to complex behavioral traits. The people who carry these genetic signatures are living repositories of Denisovan biological innovation, maintaining genetic solutions to environmental challenges that were developed hundreds of thousands of years ago. The discovery of previously unknown Denisovan genetic contributions continues as researchers analyze genomes from populations that have not been extensively studied in the past. Recent investigations of indigenous groups in Southeast Asia, the Philippines, and Indonesia have revealed additional examples of Denisovan ancestry that show distinctive patterns suggesting contact with different Denisovan populations or different timing of genetic exchange. These discoveries indicate that the story of Denisovan genetic inheritance is more complex and extensive than early research had indicated. The technological capabilities that enable this genetic archaeology include not only advanced sequencing technologies, but also sophisticated computational methods for analyzing the evolutionary relationships between different genetic variants and tracing their origins back through time. Machine learning algorithms can identify genetic signatures that indicate ancient ancestry even when those signatures have been diluted by thousands of years of genetic mixing with other populations. The search for Denisovan genetic material has been complicated by the fact that these ancient people were themselves genetically diverse, with different populations having accumulated distinct genetic characteristics during hundreds of thousands of years of adaptation to different environments. This means that Denisovan ancestry in modern populations may include genetic contributions from multiple ancient lineages that were as genetically distinct from each other as modern humans are from Neanderthals. The functional analysis of Denisovan genetic variants found in modern populations has revealed that many of these ancient genetic contributions continue to provide biological benefits that enhance survival and reproduction in specific environmental conditions. Rather than being evolutionary relics, these genetic variants represent active adaptations that continue to influence human biology in ways that can be measured through detailed physiological and medical analysis. The high-altitude adaptations found in Tibetan and other mountain populations represent perhaps the most dramatic example of functional Denisovan genetic inheritance. But researchers are discovering additional examples of beneficial genetic variants that may have Denisovan origins. Some populations show enhanced cold tolerance that may reflect genetic adaptations originally developed by Denisovan populations living in northern Asian environments. Others show distinctive immune system characteristics that may provide protection against specific tropical diseases. The neurological implications of Denisovan genetic inheritance remain among the most intriguing and controversial aspects of contemporary genetic research. Some genetic variants that appear to have Denisovan origins are associated with genes that influence brain development, neural connectivity, and cognitive function. While the relationship between genetic variation and intellectual capability is complex and poorly understood, the possibility that some aspects of human cognitive diversity may reflect ancient genetic contributions from different human species has profound implications for our understanding of human potential. The medical applications of research into Denisovan genetic inheritance are beginning to emerge as scientists develop better understanding of how these ancient genetic variants influence contemporary human health and disease susceptibility. Some Denisovan-derived genetic variants may influence responses to pharmaceutical treatments, susceptibility to specific diseases, or effectiveness of medical interventions in ways that could inform personalized medicine approaches. The conservation genetics perspective on Denisovan ancestry emphasizes the importance of preserving the genetic diversity that represents hundreds of thousands of years of human evolutionary history. As modern transportation and communication technologies enable increased contact between previously isolated populations, there is risk that ancient genetic variants could be lost through genetic mixing and demographic change before their functions and significance are fully understood. The ethical considerations involved in genetic research on ancient human ancestry include questions about informed consent, cultural sensitivity, and the potential for genetic information to be misused for discriminatory purposes. Researchers working with indigenous populations must navigate complex issues related to community ownership of genetic data, the potential commercial value of genetic discoveries, and the responsibility to ensure that research benefits the communities that participate in it. The technological frontiers of genetic archaeology continue to advance rapidly, with new methods being developed for extracting genetic information from increasingly degraded biological materials and for analyzing genetic data at levels of resolution that were impossible just a few years ago. These advances suggest that our understanding of Denisovan genetic inheritance will continue to evolve as new analytical capabilities reveal previously hidden aspects of ancient genetic contributions. The possibility of using genetic engineering techniques to study or even recreate Denisovan genetic variants raises profound scientific and ethical questions about the extent to which modern science should attempt to resurrect or modify ancient genetic adaptations. While current technology is far from enabling the recreation of entire Denisovan individuals, the ability to introduce specific Denisovan genetic variants into laboratory cell cultures or animal models could provide unprecedented insights into how these adaptations function at the molecular level. The de-extinction debates that have emerged around species like woolly mammoths and other recently extinct animals have begun to include discussions about whether similar approaches could or should be applied to extinct human lineages like Denisovans. The technical challenges involved in such projects would be enormous, requiring complete genetic blueprints and sophisticated reproductive technologies that do not currently exist. More fundamentally, the ethical implications of attempting to recreate extinct human species raise questions about consent, identity, and the rights of potentially created individuals that have no clear precedent in human experience. The cultural implications of discovering that substantial Denisovan ancestry persists in contemporary populations challenge traditional concepts of human identity and the boundaries between different human groups. Rather than being a uniform species with minor variations, modern humans emerge from this research as a complex mixture of different evolutionary lineages that have been integrated through tens of thousands of years of interbreeding and cultural exchange. The search for living Denisovan genetic signatures has expanded beyond human populations to include analysis of ancient DNA from archaeological sites, museum specimens, and even environmental samples that might contain traces of Denisovan genetic material. These approaches have the potential to reveal new information about Denisovan populations, from regions where direct fossil evidence is unavailable, but where genetic traces might persist in unexpected contexts. The protein analysis techniques that have been developed to extract information from ancient bones and teeth are providing new methods for identifying Denisovan remains, even when DNA preservation is poor. These techniques can identify species-specific protein signatures that survive longer than DNA in some environmental conditions, potentially expanding the geographic and temporal range of sites where Denisovan presence can be documented. The environmental DNA analysis that has revealed genetic signatures of ancient organisms in sediment layers is beginning to be applied to archaeological sites where Denisovan occupation is suspected. This approach could potentially identify Denisovan genetic material even at sites where no bones or artifacts have been preserved, dramatically expanding our knowledge of where and when these people lived. The artificial intelligence applications that are being developed for genetic analysis include machine learning systems that can identify ancient ancestry signatures in modern genomes with greater accuracy than traditional statistical methods. These systems can detect subtle patterns in genetic data that might indicate previously unknown episodes of interbreeding or genetic exchange between different human lineages. The citizen science initiatives that are beginning to emerge around genetic ancestry research are enabling individuals to contribute their own genetic data to large-scale research projects aimed at mapping the distribution and characteristics of ancient human genetic contributions. These projects have the potential to identify rare genetic variants and unusual ancestry patterns that might not be detected through traditional research approaches focused on specific populations. The pharmaceutical industry has begun to recognize the potential value of ancient genetic variants for drug development, particularly in areas related to altitude adaptation, cold tolerance, immune system function, and other physiological processes that are influenced by Denisovan genetic contributions. Understanding how these ancient adaptations function could lead to new therapeutic approaches for treating various medical conditions. The personalized medicine applications of Denisovan genetic research include the development of genetic tests that can identify individuals who carry specific ancient genetic variants that might influence their responses to medications, their susceptibility to certain diseases, or their suitability for particular medical treatments. This information could enable more effective and safer medical care tailored to individual genetic characteristics. The sports science applications of research into Denisovan genetic adaptations include investigations of whether certain athletic capabilities might be enhanced in individuals who carry specific ancient genetic variants. The high-altitude adaptations found in Tibetan populations, for example, might provide advantages for endurance sports or activities performed at elevation, while other genetic variants might influence strength, speed, or recovery capabilities. The space exploration implications of Denisovan genetic research include the possibility that some ancient adaptations might be beneficial for humans living and working in the extreme environments encountered during space travel or planetary colonization. The physiological modifications that enabled Denisovans to survive in low oxygen, high radiation, or extreme temperature conditions might provide insights for enhancing human capabilities for space exploration. The conservation applications of genetic research into ancient human adaptations include efforts to preserve the genetic diversity that represents hundreds of thousands of years of human evolutionary history. As globalization increases contact between previously isolated populations, there is urgency to document and preserve genetic variants that might be lost through demographic mixing before their functions and significance are fully understood. The forensic applications of advanced genetic analysis techniques developed for studying ancient human ancestry are beginning to be applied to contemporary criminal investigations and identification of human remains. The ability to extract detailed genetic information from highly degraded biological samples has improved capabilities for solving cold cases and identifying victims of disasters or conflicts. The genealogical applications of research into ancient human ancestry are enabling individuals to trace their genetic heritage back tens of thousands of years and to understand their connections to prehistoric human populations. Commercial genetic testing companies are beginning to incorporate information about ancient ancestry into their products, allowing customers to learn about their Denisovan, Neanderthal, and other archaic human genetic contributions. The educational implications of discovering the extent of Denisovan genetic inheritance in modern populations are transforming how human evolution and diversity are taught in schools and universities. Rather than presenting human evolution as a simple linear progression, educators are increasingly emphasizing the complex network of interactions between different human lineages that shaped our species' development. The future directions of research into contemporary Denisovan ancestry will likely include increasingly sophisticated analytical techniques that can extract more detailed information from smaller amounts of genetic material and can trace the evolutionary history of specific genetic variants with greater precision. These advances will continue to reveal new aspects of how ancient human populations interacted and how their genetic contributions continue to influence contemporary human biology. The potential for discovering additional archaic human lineages through genetic analysis of modern populations remains high, as improved analytical techniques and expanded sampling of diverse populations around the world may reveal genetic signatures of previously unknown ancient human species. The complexity of human evolutionary history appears to be much greater than previously recognized, with multiple episodes of interbreeding and genetic exchange contributing to the contemporary human gene pool. The search for living Denisovans hidden within modern human genomes represents more than just an academic exercise in understanding human evolutionary history. It is a quest to understand the full scope of human biological potential and to recognize that the remarkable capabilities displayed by different human populations around the world may reflect genetic gifts from our ancient relatives who developed these adaptations over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution in diverse and challenging environments. The Denisovans may have disappeared as distinct populations, but their genetic legacy continues to enhance human survival and adaptation in the modern world. Standing at the threshold of a new era in human understanding, we find ourselves confronting truths about our own species that would have seemed like science fiction just a generation ago. The story of the Denisovans has shattered our most fundamental assumptions about human evolution, identity, and potential, revealing that we are not the singular triumph of evolutionary progress we once believed ourselves to be, but rather the complex result of genetic and cultural exchanges between multiple human lineages that each contributed essential elements to what we have become. The implications of this discovery extend far beyond academic curiosity to touch upon the most profound questions about human nature, diversity, and our collective future as a species. The transformation in our understanding of human evolution brought about by Denisovan research represents one of the most dramatic paradigm shifts in the history of science. For over a century, the study of human origins was dominated by the search for the missing link, the single evolutionary pathway that connected our ape ancestors to modern humanity through a series of increasingly sophisticated intermediate forms. This linear model of human evolution suggested that progress was inevitable, that each stage represented an improvement over the previous one, and that modern humans were the ultimate goal toward which all previous evolution had been directed. The Denisovan discovery has revealed this entire framework to be fundamentally incorrect. Human evolution was not a ladder leading inexorably toward modern perfection, but rather a complex tree with multiple branches that developed different solutions to the challenges of survival in diverse environments. Each branch of this tree, including the Denisovans, Neanderthals, and various other archaic human lineages, represents a different experiment in what it means to be human, with each experiment producing unique combinations of physical, cognitive, and cultural adaptations. The recognition that modern humans are themselves a hybrid species, carrying genetic material from multiple ancestral lineages, has profound implications for how we understand human diversity and potential. Rather than viewing differences between human populations as departures from some ideal standard, we can now recognize that this diversity reflects the preservation of different adaptive solutions that were developed by our various ancestors over hundreds of thousands of years of independent evolution. The genetic gifts that we have inherited from Denisovans include not only the specific adaptations that enable survival at high altitude or in cold environments, but also a broader expansion of human biological potential that has enhanced our species' ability to colonize and thrive in virtually every environment on Earth. The rapid global expansion of modern humans that began around 70,000 years ago was facilitated partly by genetic acquisitions from archaic human populations who had already solved many of the challenges involved in surviving in diverse and challenging environments. This understanding has important implications for contemporary discussions about human enhancement and the future direction of human evolution. Rather than viewing genetic modification as an artificial departure from natural humanity, we can recognize that humans have always been enhanced through genetic acquisition from other lineages. The technologies that may eventually allow us to consciously direct our own genetic development are simply new tools for continuing a process of enhancement and adaptation that has been fundamental to human evolution throughout our species' history. The medical implications of Denisovan research extend far beyond the specific genetic variants that provide altitude adaptation or disease resistance to include a fundamental reframing of how we approach human health and medical treatment. The recognition that different human populations carry different genetic toolkits for dealing with environmental challenges suggests that effective medical care must be tailored to the specific genetic characteristics of individual patients, rather than assuming that all humans respond identically to the same treatments. The pharmacogenomic applications of this research are beginning to reveal that medication effectiveness and safety can vary dramatically between individuals who carry different ancient genetic variants. Some drugs that are highly effective for people with certain genetic backgrounds may be ineffective or even dangerous for people with different ancestry profiles. This personalized approach to medicine, informed by knowledge of ancient genetic contributions, has the potential to dramatically improve medical outcomes while reducing adverse reactions and treatment failures. The implications for understanding human cognitive diversity are equally profound, though more controversial and less well understood. The possibility that some aspects of human intellectual variation may reflect genetic contributions from different archaic human lineages challenges simplistic notions of intelligence, while also raising complex questions about the relationship between genetic ancestry and cognitive capabilities. Rather than supporting racist hierarchies, this research suggests that human cognitive diversity represents a valuable resource that reflects different types of intelligence that evolve to solve different environmental and social challenges. The educational implications of Denisovan research include the need to completely restructure how human evolution and diversity are taught in schools and universities. The old models that presented human evolution as a simple progression from primitive to advanced must be replaced with more complex narratives that emphasize the interconnected nature of human development and the contributions of multiple lineages to contemporary human capabilities. The social and political implications of recognizing that all modern humans are genetically mixed populations include powerful arguments against racism and ethnic discrimination based on false notions of genetic purity or superiority. If all human populations carry genetic material from multiple ancient lineages, then concepts of racial hierarchy become scientifically meaningless, and human diversity becomes a source of strength rather than a basis for division. The conservation implications of this research include urgent needs to preserve the genetic diversity that represents hundreds of thousands of years of human evolutionary experimentation. As globalization increases contact between previously isolated populations, there is risk that rare genetic variants could be lost through demographic mixing before their functions and significance are fully understood. The genetic heritage preserved in isolated populations may contain solutions to challenges that humanity will face in the future, making conservation of human genetic diversity a matter of critical importance for our species' long-term survival. The technological implications of Denisovan research include new possibilities for human enhancement that build upon the genetic modifications that our ancestors acquired through interbreeding with archaic human populations. Understanding how these ancient adaptations function at the molecular level could inform the development of genetic therapies that enhance human capabilities for dealing with extreme environments, resist disease, or improve cognitive performance. The space exploration applications of research into ancient human adaptations are particularly intriguing, as some of the physiological modifications that enabled archaic human populations to survive in extreme environments may be relevant for enhancing human capabilities for space travel and planetary colonization. The low oxygen adaptations developed by high-altitude populations, the cold tolerance mechanisms evolved by northern populations, and the radiation resistance that may be present in some genetic lineages could all provide starting points for developing enhanced humans capable of surviving and thriving in space environments. The philosophical implications of Denisovan research challenge fundamental assumptions about human uniqueness and our relationship to other forms of life. If modern humans are the result of genetic mixing between multiple lineages, and if some of our most important adaptations were acquired through interbreeding rather than independent evolution, then our sense of special status as the pinnacle of evolution becomes much more complicated. We are not the inevitable result of evolutionary progress, but rather the fortunate beneficiaries of genetic exchanges that could easily have proceeded differently. The future directions of research into archaic human populations will likely reveal additional lineages and additional episodes of genetic exchange that contributed to modern human evolution. The technologies for extracting and analyzing ancient genetic material continue to improve rapidly, making it possible to recover genetic information from increasingly old and degraded specimens. Each new discovery has the potential to reveal previously unknown aspects of human evolutionary history and to identify additional genetic contributions that continue to influence contemporary human biology. The potential for discovering living populations that maintain higher levels of archaic human ancestry remains an active area of research, particularly in remote regions where geographic isolation may have preserved genetic variants that have been lost elsewhere. The systematic analysis of genetic diversity in previously unstudied populations continues to reveal new patterns of ancient ancestry and new examples of functional genetic variants that provide adaptive advantages. The citizen science applications of genetic ancestry research are enabling individuals around the world to contribute to scientific understanding of human evolutionary history while also learning about their own genetic heritage. Large-scale genetic databases that include millions of individual genomes are providing unprecedented statistical power for detecting rare ancestry patterns and for tracing the geographic and temporal distribution of the emerging field of ancient proteomics, which analyzes protein sequences preserved in archaeological specimens, is providing new methods for studying archaic human populations in contexts where DNA preservation is poor. These techniques may enable identification of archaic human remains in tropical environments where genetic material is rapidly degraded, potentially expanding our knowledge of where and when different human lineages lived. The integration of genetic, archaeological, and environmental data through sophisticated computational modeling is beginning to provide comprehensive reconstructions of how different human populations interacted during critical periods of evolutionary history. These models can simulate the demographic and genetic consequences of different scenarios for human migration and interbreeding, helping researchers understand the processes that shaped contemporary human genetic diversity. The recognition that Denisovans were not a minor footnote in human evolutionary history, but rather a major contributor to contemporary human capabilities, has profound implications for how we understand our own potential and our responsibilities to future generations. The genetic gifts that we have inherited from these ancient people include not only specific physiological adaptations, but also enhanced diversity that provides our species with greater flexibility for dealing with future challenges. The story of the Denisovans ultimately teaches us that human strength comes not from genetic purity or evolutionary isolation, but from the complex mixing of different lineages that each contributed unique solutions to the challenges of survival and adaptation. As we face an uncertain future marked by environmental change, technological disruption, and new challenges that our species has never before encountered, the genetic and cultural diversity that we have inherited from our various ancestors provides us with a rich toolkit for adaptation and survival. The Denisovan Empire may have disappeared as a distinct civilization tens of thousands of years ago, but its legacy lives on in the genes, capabilities, and potential of billions of people who carry forward the biological innovations developed over hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution in Asia. Understanding this legacy provides not only insights into our past, but also guidance for our future, reminding us that human success has always depended on diversity, cooperation, and the willingness to learn from and integrate with others who may be different from ourselves. In recognizing the Denisovans as our ancestors and genetic benefactors, rather than as extinct curiosities, we acknowledge that human evolution is an ongoing process that continues to shape our species' capabilities and potential. The choices we make about how to manage human genetic diversity, how to use new technologies for human enhancement, and how to prepare for future challenges will determine whether the Denisovan legacy of adaptation and innovation continues to benefit humanity for generations to come. The forgotten empire of Asia has taught us that we are not alone in the universe of human possibility, but rather part of a continuing experiment in what it means to be human that began hundreds of thousands of years ago and shows no signs of ending.